When I want to start a company in Denmark, but I don't live there yet, what options do I have?
So that's actually a really good question. So in your current situation where you live abroad, then your only real option is actually to make a limited liability company. And that is because you have to live in Denmark to register a sole proprietorship. So a limited liability company is a company structure where you have to pay an initial amount of money, which we call the equity capital. And that equity capital basically will belong to the company. And should anything go wrong, then that is the money that you will lose. This is why we call this a limited liability company. So in your current situation, that would be my recommendation to you, is a limited liability company.
When I will be living in Denmark, will my options be different?
Yes, once you move to Denmark, there will be an additional option, and that is the sole proprietorship. So the requirement to make a sole proprietorship is that you have residence in Denmark. So you need to live in Denmark, you need to have a social security number. So you basically have your address, you live there. Once you do that, the sole proprietorship is your second option. So the good thing about the sole proprietorship is that it's much cheaper to make, it's also fast to make, and very importantly, it's also very easy to close again. If you make the limited liability company abroad, then the challenge is that if things don't really work out and you decide that it's not really you to have a limited company, it will take you quite a long time to close it as well. So when you live in Denmark, my recommendation would be, if it's a new company and you're not 100% sure that this is what you want to do, then start with a sole proprietorship and then maybe later consider a limited liability company.
And what if I choose a limited liability company? What about taxes in this situation?
The company income tax is 22%, and the way that you can pay that tax, there's basically two different ways. There are some people, they prefer to wait paying the tax until the fiscal year has ended. So they basically go the whole year without paying anything. The year ends, and then they pay the company income tax from the tax summary after they get that from the tax office. The downside on that is that you will be paying some interest for being basically late with paying the tax, and instead you can opt in to pay an estimated company income tax during the year, which is done in March and November. There is also a third option to pay an estimated tax, and that will be in January the following year. So if you decide to pay those three estimated amounts, then you're able to lower the interest that you pay for being late with your taxes, basically. So that would be my answer in terms of the company income tax.
Okay. If I choose sole proprietorship, how does the company pay tax and how do I pay my own personal tax?
So the tax is paid in 10 installments, and the only 2 months that you are not paying is in June and in December. You decide the estimate, and it's always very advisable that you try and make a budget and try to, see how much money you're going to make. But it is, of course, very difficult. But make an estimate as precise as you can so that you are using these 10 installments to be upfront with your income tax. Some people prefer not to pay any tax during the year. And the reason for that is, of course, the cash flow, that they're able to have a little more money in the bank. But the downside is that they will be paying some interest once the year has ended.
If I start sole proprietorship, can I have employees?
Yes, even though you are sole proprietorship, then you are allowed to hire employees. So don't take the definition too strict. A one-man company is also what we call a sole proprietorship, but you are still allowed to have employees just like a limited liability company.
I've just hired my first employee and it's time for me to pay first salary. What information should I give to you?
So when you decide to hire employees, there is a few formalities that we need to make sure is in place. So the first one is that the company needs to be registered as an employer. It's something that we do for you. It's very simple. After the company is registered as an employer, we need to create the company in a payroll system. We usually recommend to use what is called Danlun. After we've created that, we need some information about the employees. We need their name, social security number, and all these things. And also, of course, we need information about the salary itself. Will it be a fixed salary per month? Will it be paid per hour? All these things we'll get from you. And the most easy way for you is just to send us a copy of the employment contract. So that's how we get started with your employees.
When I start my company, and start my activities, what type of expenses can I include in the company?
So you can deduct everything that relates to the company. And usually when people ask this question, it's because they're not really sure if, a cost is considered private or a company cost. So a good rule of thumb is that if it feels wrong, it's probably because it's not for the company. You could have a cost that's maybe private. Maybe you took your family to Tivoli Gardens or something, and that would be considered a private cost, not a company cost. If you do something for employees, for clients, it's a company cost and you can always deduct it in the business. There are a few situations where something is considered maybe partly private, and there's also a few things that you cannot deduct 100%. But in general, if you have something that is related to the business, then don't worry about it. Just include it in the company cost, and your accountant will decide whether or not you can deduct that fully or partly.
In my company, I travel a lot around Europe, Asia, America. What kind of travel expenses can I include in the company?
In terms of traveling costs, then you can basically deduct everything that relates to the trip. So it means that you have an option to deduct hotels and planes and food and everything that you have during your travel. If you're not good in collecting all the receipts and the invoices, instead you can decide to use a fixed amount per day, and that amount is set by the government. It's usually not that high, so it's not something that I would recommend you to do. But if it is a problem for you to, let's say, ask the taxi driver for a receipt or ask for something at the restaurant, then that could be your best choice to use the fixed rate instead.
When I have all these costs, should I keep all these receipts, bills, invoices for coffee, taxi, and all these little things? Because it could be a lot of bills and documents. Should I keep it, or is there other option?
And yes, you actually need to keep the receipts. Like I mentioned before, then there is this second option of using the fixed amounts. But since the fixed amounts are relatively small, it's not a very good idea. The best idea is to keep all the receipts. So you don't have to travel around with all the papers. You can instead take your phone and just take a picture of the receipt and throw it out. It's enough in Denmark to keep the picture as your documentation. And also most of the accounting software is able to receive the pictures. You basically just download an app, and through the app you can upload all these receipts and invoices you have from your travel. So it's much easier than it was in the past by just using an app and your phone.
In my company, I have a lot of meetings and I have to drive my car, my own car I already have. So may I include that car, my own private car, in the company?
As a general rule, you can always deduct the cost you have for your car if the driving relates to the company. We have a few different options, and they depend on what type of company you have. If you have a sole proprietorship, then either put the receipts and invoices into the company. That means your car insurance, could be your road tax, could be the gasoline, service on the car. Collect all the documents, take a picture just like with the travel costs, and include them in the company's accounting. Now, when you do that, since it's a private car, a lot of these costs will be private, because even if you put gas in your car, it will not be 100% company. Some of it will be private naturally. So in order for the accountant to handle these documents correctly, you will need to keep track of when you drive for the business and when you drive for private purposes. You can either download an app for that and use the app to keep track of company and private driving, or you can put it down on a piece of paper and simply write what address you drive from and to, and then maybe once a week, calculate the percentage of business and private. If you do like that, you will have no problems with the tax office. If it's a problem for you to collect all the documents, let's say that it's a problem for you to collect the gas bills and the car insurance and so on, then you're allowed to use a fixed amount per kilometer instead, which only requires that you keep track of the kilometers. So again, you will need to either use an app to register where you drive, or keep it on a paper where you simply write the address from and to, and then based upon that, we will calculate a deduction for you. It can sometimes be a pretty good idea, especially if it's a new car that has a very good mileage, meaning that you can drive quite a long distance per liter of gasoline. If that's the case, very often it will be best to use a fixed amount per kilometer.